Hey everybody, my name is Dr. Whitney Costers. I am a professor of English, and I've dedicated this entire channel to helping people understand literature and writing. And one text that I've assigned every single semester without fail is A Modest Proposal. Now, most people don't read A Modest Proposal and think, wow, that was really enlightening. In fact, my students often read it and think something closer to, well, that was really weird and messed up. Why are we reading this in a writing class? That reaction is totally understandable because the author, Jonathan Swift, doesn't ease you into this essay, and he certainly doesn't give you a clear moral handrail to hold on to while you read. But what needs to be understood early on is that discomfort is not a side effect of this text. It is the text. And that is exactly why this essay trips up so many people. Students often don't know how they're supposed to approach this or respond to it. They aren't sure whether to take it seriously, whether they're allowed to find it darkly funny, or whether the fact that it feels disturbing means they've misunderstood it. Instructors, meanwhile, are often trying to help students work through that discomfort without simply telling them what to think or stripping the essay of what makes it unsettling in the first place. So having a clear framework helps, which is why I've linked a full teaching guide on A Modest Proposal down below that walks through the essay step by step. Because truly, this is one of those texts where how it's approached shapes everything that follows. One way to get that framework is to recognize what the essay is actually doing. So this is a rhetorical text. Rhetoric is about how language works on people. It focuses on who is speaking, who they're speaking to, what assumptions they're relying on, and what kind of response they're trying to produce. That means paying attention to the rhetorical situation. Now, the rhetorical situation includes the historical context, the problem being addressed, the audience being targeted, and the constraints shaping what the writer can say directly. Swift is writing in 18th century Ireland under English economic control and responding to widespread poverty treated as an abstract policy issue rather than a moral crisis. Emotional appeals had already failed multiple times over. Conventional reform proposals had been ignored. So that situation determines the strategy that Swift would choose in A Modest Proposal. Now, the target audience matters here. Swift is not writing to the poor or to those directly suffering. He is writing to educated English and Anglo-Irish readers who see themselves as rational, moral, and pragmatic. These are people who trust policy language, economic reasoning, and administrative solutions. The purpose of the essay is not to convince this audience to accept cannibalism. The purpose is to expose how their existing values and modes of reasoning allow cruelty to sound reasonable when framed as efficiency and public good. Before going further, it helps to clarify two terms that come up constantly with this essay and that many students haven't had clearly defined before: irony and satire. Irony at its most basic level is a gap between what is being said and what is actually meant. In written text, that gap is intentional. The speaker presents one position on the surface, but the reader is meant to recognize that the real meaning lies elsewhere. The challenge with irony is that it doesn't announce itself. If the surface meaning is taken at face value, the text's real work is missed. Satire is a rhetorical strategy that uses irony to expose problems in thinking, behavior, or systems of power. Satire does not correct those problems by stating a moral directly. Instead, it exaggerates, imitates, or pushes existing ideas to an extreme so that their underlying logic becomes visible. Satire assumes the reader can recognize that exposure and sit with the discomfort it creates. Published in 1729, A Modest Proposal presents itself as a rational solution to Irish poverty by suggesting that poor people be sold and consumed. Now, Swift isn't serious in the ordinary sense of the word, but he is serious about something much harder to confront, which is how cruelty can be made to sound reasonable when filtered through the language of logic, efficiency, and public good. Now, this video is not meant to give the only way to read this essay. It's meant to offer a productive way to read it. One of the most useful shifts with A Modest Proposal is to stop asking what Swift believes and start asking what kind of voice is speaking and who that voice is meant to persuade. Swift doesn't write like a storyteller or a moral reformer, but like a policy thinker addressing an audience that prides itself on being rational, practical, and morally upright. And that voice is the satire. Satire here isn't about humor in a modern sense. It is about exposure. Swift assumes the audience already knows what is right and then forces a confrontation with the distance between values and actions. Irony allows this to happen. One thing is said while another is meant, and the strategy is maintained without interruption. There's no wink, no reassurance, no moment of clarification. That refusal to protect the reader is precisely what makes the essay destabilizing. Some historical context sharpens this further. In the 18th century, Ireland was economically dominated by England through trade restrictions and taxation policies that benefited English landlords while leaving much of the Irish population in extreme poverty. Swift was Irish, but also part of the Anglo-Irish elite, and he served as Dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin. So that placed him close enough to power to understand policy and close enough to suffering to see its consequences. Before writing a modest proposal, Swift had already offered serious solutions, such as taxing absentee landlords and supporting Irish industry. Those proposals were ignored, though. Instead of becoming more emotional or more direct, Swift became colder, more logical, and more extreme. That rhetorical choice is central to how the essay works. Swift shocks not by sounding angry, but by sounding reasonable. You'll notice that the essay is very carefully engineered. It opens by describing poverty in observational, almost sympathetic terms, inviting agreement. But only after that shared ground is established does the proposal appear. By then, the reader is already inside the argument's logic, which intensifies the disturbance. Credibility is built through careful calculation, acknowledgement of alternatives, and a tone of moderation. This is ethos at work. Swift presents himself as thoughtful and responsible, and then logic takes over. Stats, population estimates, and economic projections reduce people to numbers. This is logos operating without ethical constraint. The reasoning is coherent, and that coherence is the point. Logical consistency does not guarantee moral legitimacy. Now, pathos operates indirectly. The essay avoids emotional language, and that absence produces discomfort. Suffering becomes administrative. People become units. The emotional response comes from recognizing how easily empathy disappears when efficiency becomes the dominant value. So language reinforces this throughout. Economic and agricultural terms refer to women as breeders and children as commodities. These choices perform rhetorical labor. When human beings are described as goods, moral boundaries erode through efficiency rather than malice. Now, this is especially clear when Swift lists the advantages of the plan: reducing poverty, discouraging abortion, strengthening marriage, stimulating the economy. These appeals align with values the audience already claims to hold. Swift isn't inventing immoral values. Existing ones are just being pushed to their extreme. As the list grows, a disturbing question begins to emerge. If the argument can momentarily sound coherent, what does that suggest about the framework producing that coherence? You'll notice that near the end, Swift does acknowledge other solutions, but he dismisses them quickly. You could tax landlords, support domestic industry, or even treat tenants humanely. These ideas are sensible, but their rejection clarifies the real accusation. The problem has never been a lack of solutions, but a lack of willingness to sacrifice power and comfort. So the cannibalism is totally unnecessary. It becomes thinkable only because meaningful reform has been consistently avoided. The final paragraph sharpens this much further. Swift claims no personal stakes since his children are grown and his wife past childbearing age. On the surface, this resembles ethical transparency. Rhetorically, it aligns the speaker with the audience, able to discuss suffering abstractly because it will never be personally experienced. You'll notice too that the essay ends without resolution, outrage, or instruction. The reader remains inside a way of thinking that treats human lives as variables and calls that rational concern. And this is the trap. Cruelty persists not through malice, but through systems that value efficiency over humanity and reason over responsibility. So this is why a modest proposal appears so frequently in writing and rhetoric courses. It trains you to recognize how argument functions, how authority is constructed, and how language makes harmful ideas sound reasonable. These skills carry forward into contemporary policy debates, media narratives, and public discourse. So the goal is not just understanding Swift, but learning how to read critically when language is doing more than it appears to be doing. This is also what makes literature like this worth returning to, not because it offers comfort or answers, but because it teaches recognition. If there are moments that unsettled or resisted easy understanding, those moments matter and they are worth paying attention to. As always, thank you so much for joining me here today. Please know that I also have a full audiobook of A Modest Proposal, as well as the teaching guide, which I have linked below. If you found this lecture useful, please consider subscribing so that you don't miss the next one. I will see you then. Be well.